I'd like to welcome Dan Kelly, President, CEO, and Chair of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, to our show. Dan has been on our show a few times, so thank you, Dan, for coming on with us and letting us know how small businesses are faring. The CFIB is the largest small business association in Canada with more than 95,000 members advocating for small business with all levels of government, as well as providing advice, tools, and savings for its members. Dan has been with CFIB since 1994 and became president in 2012. In 2015, Power and Influence magazine named him one of the top 100 most powerful and influential people in government and politics. I'd like to welcome to the show Dan Kelly. Welcome.
Good to be with you, Alan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. As always, want to just have a chat, kind of an informal chat, and kind of get the feel for how small businesses are doing. We spoke quite a while ago now, and wondering if things have changed. Also have some questions I want to get to that have been, I guess, I've been wondering about with respect to what's going on with a lot of the macro data we've been seeing from the government. So let's get to the first question, which is pretty simply, how are small businesses faring, right? A while back we heard that they were struggling coming out of COVID, struggling under the weight of higher interest rates, et cetera. Has anything changed? And I know that they're struggling to increase revenues, increase growth.
Yeah.
If they are still struggling, what would you say is the number one issue for most of these businesses today?
Look, a really good question. And as we look around and streets are busier again and parking is harder to find, people kind of think that everything's back to normal or largely back to normal post-pandemic. But for most small businesses, it is nothing like normal times. And demand still seems to be a big struggle for many small firms. Only half of small businesses across Canada, even now, are reporting that their revenues are back to pre-pandemic levels. Half of them are still below 2019 levels of sales. And even those that have had sales return back to normal, they're dealing with as we all are as Canadians, just with a crushing level of cost increases, making profitability really, really tough for most businesses. So we've got a bunch of things happening. We've got lower demand in many small businesses, in some cases because things have shifted over the course of the pandemic. For example, working from home for many white collar workers has meant that a lot of the small businesses that serve downtown office cores, they're just not seeing demand come back to where it was pre-pandemic. We've also had the shift towards more online retail than before, and that's meant for some retailers that they're not getting the demand in store to the degree that they had. But beyond that, businesses are dealing with all of the cost increases, a gripping shortage of labor, rising interest rates that are super high compared to what we've experienced in previous years. That's putting huge pressure on firms. A lot of debt that is still dragging small businesses under, both personal debt, some of it in government-backed loans. So it is a big storm of issues. Optimism levels are low. Our data is not suggesting that there's going to be a recession, but our data from small business owners is saying that growth is super low, and that they're struggling to the viability of their business is in question.
So I guess getting to the question that I wanted to ask you, that I think about all the time, is that we get obviously a lot of macro data from the government, talking about jobs growth, speaking about retail sales doing well. We get a lot of positive data, a lot of it, or most of it, is positive, and yet that leads the Bank of Canada to wonder if they should keep raising interest rates.
Yeah.
When we speak, we're hearing that a lot of the small businesses are struggling. So I guess the main question I have is, why aren't these struggles playing out in the macro data? Why does the macro data still show strength?
Yeah, look, we've seen some big shifts over the course of the pandemic. So the places that spending was focused on prior to the pandemic isn't necessarily the same spots that it's focused on post-pandemic. Especially with inflationary pressures that average Canadians are facing, some of the spend with higher prices attached to it is going to more necessary goods, and so service related businesses, and other small firms that are specialty retailers, for example, are seeing drops in aggregate demand in their types of firms as well. So yeah, the macro data can certainly hide a lot of the story. And that's why we put out, CFIB has a business barometer, monthly business barometer. Your listeners can subscribe to it to get a sense of what's happening in what I call the non-stock market economy. These players are really, really struggling still. And a lot of that, I think, is just a bunch of untold pressures that are coming home. We were told, of course, during the pandemic that there would be these boom times post-pandemic where we'd all be spending our brains out with all the savings that we had accumulated over the course of the pandemic. And that, while that may have been true for some, there certainly weren't very many beneficiaries in the small, medium-sized business world that feel like that has actually happened. Demand is a problem in most small businesses, so our data tells us.
Yeah, and I think you make up a good point. There's definitely a difference between the stock market business or market and the small business. Obviously, a lot of the small businesses, or most, aren't trading on the New York or Toronto Stock Exchange or New York Stock Exchange. And so that business is totally different than what we see in the stock market, which, depending on which sector you're looking at, perhaps has had an okay year, especially if you're looking at the tech sector. So a big difference between the big companies and the small companies. And I think, a lot of people are still shopping at Amazon, so their earnings are still doing well. Meanwhile, the small little retailer, in middle of Toronto, for example, is struggling under the weight of, like you said, higher costs. Kind of shifting gears a little bit here. What is happening with the CEBA loan repayment? I wanted to ask you about that because I actually had a meeting with a client of mine, and he was trying to figure out whether he should pay back the loan or not, whether he should just take the hit of I forget what the percentage was of a penalty for not paying it, or he should, I guess, go into his savings, his investment accounts, which I manage for him, to pull out that money to pay back the loan. And so obviously, businesses are struggling enough that they're finding it hard to pay it back. So what's going on with the CEBA loan repayment?
Yeah, look, when the CEBA was first issued, the Canada Emergency Business Account, it was a $40,000 loan. And if you took out that loan from government to help you get through the pandemic, you got to keep $10,000 of that loan. There was a forgivable chunk. You had to pay it back by the end of 2022. The government then added another 20 grand to the loan when the pandemic dragged on longer than anyone expected. So it became a maximum $60,000 loan, and up to 20,000 of that, a full third, is forgivable if you repay the balance. That deadline to repay the balance was extended a couple of years ago to the end of 2023, so just a few weeks from now. Small businesses have said, look, the pandemic lasted way longer than anyone anticipated. 2 weeks or 2 months to flatten the curve became 2 years of restrictions on and off. And so many businesses just don't have the money to repay the 40 grand in order to keep that $20,000 forgivable chunk. With the deadline coming towards the end of the year, we've put huge pressure on the federal government to give us another extension to give businesses more time to repay the loan. So the federal government just a few weeks ago announced, with big celebrations, the Prime Minister himself announced that there would be a 1-year extension to CEBA loan repayment rules, and businesses started to celebrate. Business owners were so relieved that they'd have some extra time. Of course, we read the fine print pretty fast of that agreement, and it wasn't a 1 year. There is technically a 1 year extension to the ultimate deadline to repay the full loan. But for that forgivable chunk, if you want to keep the $20,000 forgivable portion, the government's extension was 18 days. Wow. So now business owners have until January 18th, 2024, about basically 100 days from now, to find the money to repay the $40,000 and then clear off their debt. They would then be forgiven $20,000 on the loan itself. 18 days expansion is not what we were looking for. It's deeply, it's created great amounts of anger on the part of business owners for the kind of the bait and switch that the feds used. But we have our data shows that we have about a third of our members that have the money or can easily get the money to repay their CEBA loan. They'll be okay. We have about a third of small businesses in Canada right now who said, I need to get to, I can't afford to take on another $20,000 in debt. So I need to borrow the money or find the money to repay my CEBA loan. In some cases, it's with really tough decisions that they have to make about foregoing perhaps an expansion or laying off a person in order to repay that. And then there's a full other third of small businesses that are saying there's no way, no how they're going to be able to repay the CEBA loan by January 18th. They're going to miss out on the forgivable chunk. Their loan balance, if you don't repay it by the end of January 2018, by January 18th, 2024, you now have a $60,000 loan. You lose the forgivable chunk, but you do have an extra year to repay. You have 3 years now for 2024, 5, and 6 to repay the full $60,000. So like your client, business owners are doing the math right now. Am I better off to beg, borrow, or steal hopefully not steal the 40 grand in order to clear off this debt and keep the 20,000? Or am I better off to just suck it up, make my loan go up by 50% to a $60,000 loan, but I will have 3 years at a 5% arranged interest to pay it off. We've got some advice for small business owners on CFIB's website, cfib.ca. I wrote a letter to members. In some cases, they will be better off with either approach. But that for you to repay it off means you have to have the available credit to be able to borrow the money if you don't have it to clear this debt.
Amazing. Most of these small businesses, obviously, they took this loan because of that forgivable portion,
right?
Or else probably most of them or many of them may not have even entered into this agreement to start with. So interesting that the government says, yeah, we'll push it off, but then we're not going to forgive a portion of that loan that we originally sold the idea on.
Yep.
So it's a tough one. I guess final question, more general question about small business. So there was a BDO Canada executive recently suggested that aging population and higher wage demands were, I guess, causing small business owners to sell their businesses. Right. Obviously, we know about the higher costs, whether it's higher interest, inflation, higher costs of materials, and combining that with wages, and then combining the idea that a lot of these businesses are owned by older folks. Do you agree with this survey? Are you seeing that these are two of the main causes of small businesses, being sold or no longer in existence?
Oh, look, there's absolutely no question. Our data at CFIB strongly parallels that. In fact, we see that 70% of small businesses, small business owners expect to leave the running of their business in the next 10 years. 70%. Wow. It is a huge number of small business owners that for demographic or financial realities need to find an exit ramp from their firm. Just on the demographic side alone, though, business owners generally work much longer than government workers who retire younger than anybody, but even younger than most private sector workers in paid employment. Business owners stick around much longer. My favorite story is one of our farm members, a small business owner in the ag sector, said, finally, Dad showed me, because he's preparing for succession, he finally showed me the books of the business. I'm so excited to take the reins here. That guy that said that was 65, and his dad was in his 80s, showing him the books for the very first time. So small business owners often talk about succession and then don't do it because they love it or they need to do it to pay their bills. And so they drag this out, but the clock doesn't last forever, right? So we're at the point now where business owners are going to be turning over just because the clock is ticking. Financially, though, you're quite right. There have been a lot of business owners motivated by the fact that their costs are rising, income is not, and so they are motivated to sell because they're just not, getting a profit out of your business right now is super tough, and so many businesses are saying, I got to hang up the keys here, and winding down my business or perhaps selling my business may be my best outcome.
Yeah, it's a scary number, 70%. Wow, you wonder what real estate's going to do at that time if a lot of businesses go vacant. A lot of
You got it.
offices go vacant. A lot of spots in the city of Toronto or wherever else go vacant. That's a scary thought. Dan Kelly, President, CEO, Chair of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Always a pleasure speaking to you and giving us some insights into how things are faring with the average small business out there.
Good to be with you anytime at all.
All right. Thank you so much.